Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Robert Puentes. I am the president and CEO of the ENO Center for Transportation, and I want to welcome you to the latest in our series of ENO Transportation webinars. Today's webinar is a model for next level interstate collaboration with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I'm joined today, at least virtually, by Kevin O'Toole, the chairman of the Board of Commissioners of the Port Authority, and Rick Cotton, the Port Authority's executive director. Just as the ENO Center is celebrating its 100-year anniversary this year, so is the Port Authority. I think it's almost the same day, sometime in March or in April of 1921, I think you were created by an act of Congress, and its mission is to oversee the creation of vital infrastructure to serve the nation's largest metropolitan area. But obviously, the reach of the Port Authority is not just in the New York region, it's around the country and literally around the world. And also, like ENO, the Port Authority is truly multimodal. It operates a major transit system, 6 interstate bridges, including the George Washington Bridge, the busiest in the world, the busiest bus terminal on Earth, the Port Authority bus station, 5 airports, including the busiest international airport in North America, and the largest seaport on the eastern seaboard. So, in addition to being a bi-state entity, the Port Authority has uniquely been financially self-supporting for its 100 years, and there really is no transportation institution in the United States quite like the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the history and the mission of the Port Authority, its unique bi-state relationship, its finances, and how all of that has or hasn't changed over these decades. We'll take some questions from the audience, so please use the questions function on the webinar website to submit. You don't have to wait until the end. You can submit questions anytime. And let me just quickly then introduce our guests. Kevin O'Toole joined the Port Authority's Board of Commissioners in 2017 and was elected chairman in August of that year. He has a long and distinguished career in public service. He was mayor of Cedar Grove, New Jersey, was elected to the state's General Assembly and later the state Senate, and he continues to serve on a variety of boards and commissions. Rick Cotton became the executive director of the Port Authority in 2017. Prior to that, he served as the New York governor's special counselor for interagency initiatives, which included infrastructure projects like LaGuardia and JFK airports, the Moynihan Train Hall, the new Tappan Zee Bridge, 2nd Avenue Subway. So obviously some major projects in the region. Both Kevin and Rick's full bios are on our website where you found the information for this webinar. You can see it there. So let me we'll just jump into it and get right to it here. As I noted, the Port Authority was created with the mission to develop and modernize New York and New Jersey's shared port district in order to improve commerce and trade. And I think it's clear when we see how the region has developed over the last 100 years, that mission has clearly been a success. And in many ways, the Port Authority is inextricably linked to the story of this great region. So how do each of you think about the role of the Port Authority today in the context of the New York region in 2021? And Mr. Chairman, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love you to kick it off.
Well, listen, I think coming out of the pandemic, Robert, it gives us even more clarity and definition as to the importance of the Port Authority. You know, when most of the world was paralyzed and shut down, it was the can-do attitude of the Port Authority employees that made sure that the planes were moving, even though we had 5,000 people as opposed to 300,000. You know, path was moving, so you had engineers and doctors and nurses and the absolutely necessary employees coming in and out. The ports were open for business, and you had medical supplies and medical services that were being transported. And literally the roadways, the bridges, and all the assets you talk about were open to make sure this region, and probably feeding out to the Midwest, were able to bring in food, supplies, and necessary materials to keep this region moving. And like I said, that really clarified for me as a resident of New Jersey for 57 years is that the importance of the Port Authority. And you can look back historically what the Port Authority started at 100 years ago, from April 30th of 21 to present day. And I think it's kind of fulfilled and gone beyond the mission of those people who put this Port Authority together from paper to its actual structure.
That's great. Rick, same question.
Well, what I would say is what we see in today's world is an increasingly interconnected world. So if you go back to the 100 years to the Port Authority, obviously bridges and tunnels, the automobile was just coming into widespread use, airplanes, decade or two later. And what you see today is the fact that increasingly we're dependent on so much that's across the river, that's outside the region, indeed, supply chains which are now global. So the role the Port Authority plays is really to continue vitally to serve that interconnectedness. And we are looking broadly. Infrastructure in this country has been underinvested in really for the last 4 or 5 decades. That's true nationally. It's true in terms of the New York, New Jersey region. So the Port Authority has been in a position now to step up to address, first of all, this increasingly interconnected world, and in addition to now commit itself in a major way to renewing our infrastructure and to really making the keep things moving motto of the agency a reality.
And you're right. I mean, 100 years is a long time. And I'm curious. So, what then has changed in terms of the Port Authority's role and what it does? You know, what stayed the same? Obviously, as you mentioned, there's no aviation industry back in 1921. But what else is different about what the Port Authority does here, Rick? If you don't mind.
Sure. You need to go back to some extent to the foundations of the Port Authority. It was unique when it was literally unique. It was the first in the nation, which was, as the chairman reflected, a compact clause entity, two states coming together, their proposed enterprise being approved by an act of Congress. But it was also conceived as a self-sufficient agency back then. So the Port Authority receives no taxpayer money from New Jersey, no taxpayer money from New York, and no taxpayer money on any kind of regular basis from the federal government. The agency raises revenues based on the facilities that it operates. It generates revenues that exceed our expenses and takes every penny of that excess and reinvests it in either new infrastructure or renewing and renovating legacy infrastructure. So that's been the core foundation. And what has evolved is the scale of the challenge. In 2019, the year before the pandemic hit, the 3 major airports handled 140 million passengers. The George Washington Bridge had more than 100 million vehicles in 2019 go over it. So the Port Authority has evolved as the population in the region has evolved. It has risen to the scale of the challenge. It expanded into the economic development sphere in the 60s and 70s when it built the World Trade Center. Obviously, the 9/11 terrorist attack then presented the extraordinary challenge of rebuilding from that. And what has happened over the last 20 years, we obviously just celebrated. We observed the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 bombing. The 16-acre campus of the World Trade Center has now become a vibrant center of Lower Manhattan, 4 office buildings, the museum and memorial, rebuilding the Performing Arts Center, rebuilding the Greek church. So what I would say is what's changed, still responsible in terms of keeping the region moving, providing the transportation infrastructure, but the scale has increased dramatically.
And so real estate is something. So you said in the 60s and 70s that was a new venture. Is that something you think will continue for the Port Authority?
Well, that's become a bit of a challenge because the World Trade Center has been, I would say, a significant success in terms of what it has become today. But real estate is not really at the core of the expertise of the Port Authority, so that some of the smaller real estate ventures, and this was the subject of a Blue Ribbon panel 5 or 6 years ago, we've really been trying to divest ourselves of smaller enterprises so we can concentrate on the really critical aspect of transportation infrastructure. So I don't think we'll expand in that area, but the World Trade Center itself remains a core asset.
Sure.
And Robert, if I could just pick up on a point, and with regard to like the path, for instance, when it was acquired from another company back in the 60s, it was recognized as a people mover. So whether it be Newark or Jersey City or New York, you had to get people to and from in a very inexpensive way. So we've seen that be a priority, making sure that people can move in and out of the workplaces, and we can move students and teachers and all kinds of professionals back and forth, and that's a focus. And also, when you look at the ports themselves, a few years ago they had to do the Bayonne dredging because it was just unthinkable that these large tanker ships were coming in, and they were getting bigger and bigger. And the TEUs that are moving in now larger than ever, because the goods and services that are being consumed by this region are more now than ever before. So I think the Port Authority has always been ahead of the curve of understanding what the needs are of the region and making sure the transportation and the infrastructure supports it.
Got it. And it is that connection between the economic goals and strategies of the region and the infrastructure to support it. The other thing, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask you that is very unique about the Port Authority is the bi-state piece of it. There's obviously a lot of bi-state group entities all over across the country, but there's something very different, I think, about the New York model, particularly the joint control by the governors in the two states. So if you don't mind, how does that play out? What are the pluses and minuses of the relationship you have there with the governors and the bi-state nature of the organization?
So do we get the pass on any of these questions, or we get no? So let me just say this about this, Robert. So as you know, it's fairly well documented. When Rick and I came on board in 2017, it was a pretty rocky time for the Port Authority, and there was a lot of back and forth between New York and New Jersey from what I was able to read. And Rick and I and the commissioners who came on board at the time kind of made a commitment that we had to commit ourselves to a unified Port Authority, even though two states, New York and New Jersey. Once you became a commissioner or an employee, you didn't say, well, this is a New York or a New Jersey priority. This is a Port Authority mission. This is a Port Authority initiative. So as much as the geography, shapes those people who come to serve at the top level, like I said, the Hudson doesn't divide us, it kind of unites us at the top. And we said, as much as we recognize, and we are enormously deferential to the governors, we recognize this is also a truly independent agency. If you go back to 1919 and 1920, when the language was being drafted, they did it in a way where the terms were actually going to be staggered. So the commissioners would get 6-year terms. The ED was there for a set term. And they did that so there wasn't just the governor would come in and just by fiat say they wanted to do A, B, C, and D. So it's a different time. So we have worked really well with the governors. We are enormously respectful of them, understanding that we have our priorities, they have their priorities, and it's up until this time, it's worked out fairly well.
And is there an overall an economic strategy for the region that the projects adhere to, or is it? I mean, these are major multi-billion-dollar projects. So I guess the tail for those is pretty long.
Well, Rick can go into the length of it. Let me just tell you this: when you go to Newark Airport and Terminal A's being, literally a $3 billion structure, it's unfathomable that when you walk up to this, Robert, and you see the nature and how large and how enormous and how structured and professional. When you see LaGuardia, when you see that the plans for the bus terminal, these are big. These are gargantuan plans that I think that the forefathers and foremothers actually had in their mind when they put this agency together. If not, New York City or the state of New Jersey or New York could have done this on their own. They knew how hard it would be, how difficult it would be. So, and the wisdom of that was that we could do these superstructures in such a unique way, relying upon the strength of each of these states to get this thing done.
And I'll tell you, as a longtime Jersey resident myself, I can tell you for folks who are listening, the interconnectedness is so obvious when you're there. I mean, obviously Manhattan is a different entity, but the flow of people and goods and everything between the two states is pervasive. And so I think to people who live there, the bi-state piece of it is secondary, right? To the just being
and Robert, to put a finer point, when we came in the year before, there was a capital plan that was passed by the other commissioners and the governors and whatnot. So we try to adhere to the capital plan with obviously make the adjustments as need be. But so when you talk about priorities, we were kind of handed a list of priorities that kind of pre-existed us coming on board, but it's an ever evolving, ever changing dynamic.
We're going to go back to something you were talking about, the finances. That is, in addition to the bi-state nature, I mean, the financial piece is so unique. And being a self-supporting agency with all the caveats that you mentioned, and being supported by tolls and fees and things that are demand based, right? We're just living through now 18 months of enormous changes in that demand. So how do you, as an agency like that, how do you navigate through those drops, and what does that mean on the revenue side for you all?
Well, the answer is very carefully. uh, if you reflect on that in terms of the immediate moment of the pandemic, since we do depend on revenues generated by our facilities, the extraordinary drop in volumes, our airports down literally to 2% at the height of the pandemic of what the traffic was pre-pandemic. Our PATH commuter railroad similarly down 95% from where it had been. Our large bridges and tunnels down by more than a third. And the port dropped, but then has come back. What that means is that we literally lost $3 billion worth of revenue over what will be the 24-month period through the first quarter of next year. And we depend, as I said earlier, we depend on our revenues in order to be able to sustain our capital spending program. So the impact in terms of the drop in revenues has really been an extraordinarily difficult period, and we're living with trying to make hard decisions about how to handle the impact of that. But big picture, over 100 years, it has been a very, very positive financial model, because the Port Authority is not dependent on the taxpayer money. It's not dependent on legislative action. It's not getting caught up in the political calculations of a state government. And so that's what's enabled the Port Authority to issue bonds, to actually plan out major infrastructure projects that are going to extend multiple years, frequently longer than the terms of the governors, an individual governor. So it empowers the Port Authority to take the long view, to look at the framework of the region and plan accordingly, plan projects accordingly. And these major infrastructure projects, they have very long gestation periods. And final comment I would make is to pick up on some of the projects that the chairman was referring to, which is if you're planning a $3 billion new terminal at Newark Airport and a set of additional support facilities like a new air train, like a brand new, very large parking and centralized rental car facility, you're planning literally an $8 billion rebuild of LaGuardia Airport. The George Washington Bridge, yes, it's 100 years old almost, but right now we're in the midst of a $2 billion renovation of the bridge so that it'll last another 100 years. Those kinds of projects require a long time horizon and a staying power, and the Port Authority was set up to play that role.
And Robert, to your point, and we're sticking another $1 billion in PATH. We're going to increase the capacity from Newark to New York 40%. We're adding additional cars. 72 new cars have been ordered. But to your point about the legislature, so having served in the Jersey Legislature, Assembly, and Senate for 22 years on the budget committees, it's always been a food fight come June that when this budget has to be cobbled together, and whether you deal with special financing, a gas tax or something other, there's no continuity from one year to another. With the port, when you have your capital, there is a continuity given our financing structure, and then we've become self-reliant. So that allows us to stand apart from the politics that are incurred in the state legislatures.
Got it. And does that change? How does it then? This may be a tough question, but when the demand has changed, like we've seen for especially on transit and aviation to some extent, but I mean the major project with the bus terminal rebuild in the middle of Manhattan, do you have to think differently about that now, or is that just, Rick, to your point, this is a major piece of infrastructure we know is necessary, and we're gonna continue with it? Does it change? Does the demand drops change the way you think about those big projects?
Well, you have to have a long is the wrong word. You have to have a planning horizon which reflects the needs of the community. So if you take the bus terminal, first of all, it is wildly out of date. Needs to be. It's almost the poster child for legacy infrastructure, which is totally inadequate to today's needs. But if you're going to plan a structure like that, but it's true of most of what we're planning at the airports. Chairman mentioned PATH. Even looking at the port, which has obviously become increasingly important in the huge growth in shipping post-pandemic. You need to both plan to take account of future growth. And once you start looking at 20, 30, 40, 50-year projections, that's really the framework. So yes, you may have a pandemic, which is a crisis in and of itself, but over the long term, one has confidence in this region. It is going to continue to grow. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when in terms of resuming the growth curves that existed pre-pandemic. And that's the framework. That's where the Port Authority excels.
Mm-hmm. And Robert, whether it's your group or the Port Authority, and to Rick's point, it's long-term prospecting. You just can't gauge on a 1 year, 3 year, 5 year forecast. It is much over a longer period of time. And while we obviously have to take into account whether it's changing technology, changing dynamics, pandemic, those things will come into our factoring, but literally over a 20, 30, 40 year period, do these calculations by some really smart people start taking hold.
Yeah. And for folks who don't know, I mean, that bus terminal, as I said, is the busiest one on Earth. I was fortunate enough to be part of a design competition judging panel, and they took us through that bus terminal. We looked at all of it. Rick, to your point, it's woefully outdated. Its function is very, very different than when it was built. If there's a needed piece of infrastructure in this country, it's definitely that bus terminal. I think you're right. It's not a question of if demand's going to come back. It's when. And that's going to be
Robert. Help us on the way. There is we are moving as quickly as possible. It's one of our top priorities, the Port Authority.
That's great. It's a very unique project for sure. Well, there's a bunch of questions coming in, a lot around the history. People are very curious. The audience for this webinar is national. A lot of folks want to know, but there's a couple things here around 9/11. I think the general vibe. What changed with the Port Authority? Obviously, the agency itself was devastated, with those attacks. But what else has changed from the Port Authority's business as a result of what happened on 9/11?
So listen, Rick and I, obviously we're not at 9/11. What we do is we talk to some of the folks who are Port Authority employees, long time, who literally have given us aid and comfort and advice as to what was before 9/11, what was after. But I will tell you, just coming on the 20-year anniversary, there's such a solemnness and a specialness to the actual, the 16-acre plot that's out there and the people who are associated. We lost 84 of our employees, 37 police men and women on that particular day. And when you talk about 9/11, Robert, to the people who have lived through it, it just reinforces what our mission is that we are there for a purpose, of an infrastructure purpose, to connect all of these regions, but we're also there for the people who have come before us for the last 100 years, whether it be 9/11 or 1993 or through the Depression, or people who had died when they were actually putting together some of the infrastructure, and people who have tended to the pile who are now getting sick. It gives a special purpose to those of our employees who work together and bond together. It's not just a job. This is their life's mission, Robert. And that 9/11 really puts, an emphasis as to what their life mission is.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one thought that I would add to that is certainly in terms of the World Trade Center, the agency has embraced the fact that the greatest tribute that we can pay to those who lost their lives is to bring back Lower Manhattan, to bring back the World Trade Center more vibrant, more energetic than it was before the attack. So the focus, the commitment to get things done, the energy around that takes on a very, very special purpose.
Indeed. Thank you for that. A couple questions here too about kind of how you operate in the region. Again, it's a unique entity. It was, it's state-based. It was created by Congress. All these projects live on the local level too. They exist in communities. So how do you work with communities in the region? I guess on the local level.
Well, I would say you have to engage with the communities that surround a major project or our facilities. And we have put a very, very special effort into doing so that every one of our major renovation projects, we have set up community outreach, sometimes formal community advisory committees, outreach centers in the community, and a major focus on how we ensure that benefits flow to the communities that surround our projects. I'll give you, just to quote a couple of figures, and it is really of scale, so that at LaGuardia, more than $1.8 billion went to minority and women-owned businesses, and more than $600 million of business contracts went to local businesses in the borough right around the airport. We've had a similar effort around the $3+ billion of construction at Newark Terminal A, with extensive outlook identification of really making business opportunities available to Newark businesses, to Elizabeth businesses, to New Jersey businesses. And my own belief is that, first of all, it's the right thing to do. But second, from the point of view of being able to move projects forward, you really have to show that kind of respect and that kind of engagement to the community that is most affected by the operation of one of our facilities.
And Robert, to another point, this is a 365 days a year. Rick and I are really focused about making sure the relations that the Port Authority have with the communities is constant, and whether we need them to talk about a project or we're just having a conversation, whether it's Mayor Baraka from Newark or whether it's the state senator from Queens or the congressmen and women, we have a constant team that is in contact, and Rick and I have an open door policy just on a regular basis. And then when a project comes up, we just don't, like other agencies, dictate what's going to get done. We say, let's have a collaboration. In the early days when we rolled out conceptually a bus terminal, a lot of folks were upset about how it was being rolled out. So we sat down and, a bunch of our top managers had a series, I think it was over 100 meetings. At the end of the day, Robert, there was a total buy-in from the community boards of all those folks who were around that bus terminal. So this is the best project. And it was only the best project because of what they added and helped devise into the plan and made it a good plan to a much better plan. If you don't have community buy-in, you're not going to get very far with the Port Authority initiatives.
And as a former mayor, you probably can recognize that better than anybody else.
Former mayor, former assembly, former senator. Listen, we have seen the arrogance of the Port Authority in years past, and that doesn't help anybody. And Rick and I were really open day one. We are never going to go back to those dark days of having the arrogance of the Port Authority just do things right or wrong with just impunity. We want to have buy-in from everybody, as transparent as humanly possible. And if there's a concern about a project or how it's going or a policy, we want to hear those concerns.
That's great. Looking at the questions coming in, as I said, it's a big national audience. A lot of questions about specific things, but a lot of people want to know about the Gateway project. That's, especially here in Washington, that's with the infrastructure bill, whatever it's doing, that's a piece of that. Let's just say, what's the Port Authority's role in that project? I think parts of it have just kicked off. I think I saw something, the Portal Bridge is moving. What's the Port Authority's role in that major project?
Well, we're a major contributor to the local share of funding it. Both states have established a separate organization, the Gateway Development Commission, which is specifically charged with assembling the financing, with overseeing the procurement of the design, build, construction companies, and then actually overseeing those companies as they go about construction. So it is the Gateway Development Commission that is really the key arm of the two states in terms of overseeing the project. In terms of the local contribution, right now that's between $5 and $6 million. The Port Authority has pledged about a third of that. We're committed to delivering that. The board has approved that funding, but the actual overseeing of the project rests with the new commission. I would really express the optimism that if the new infrastructure bill pending in the Congress is passed, that the funding will be there. There's a clear plan in order to move that forward, and the Biden administration deserves great credit for coming to the table as a supporter of that project.
I think it's clear recognition. It seems like the narrative has changed, that it's not just a New Jersey project or a New York project. It is a project, and even beyond the Northeast Corridor, right? It is a project that it's truly nationally significant. I think you get a lot of agreement from people on that one. Well, that's a big project. It's obviously a major project. How about smaller things? A lot of folks are curious about new technologies. What about things like electric charging stations? About unmanned aerial systems? Moving people from Manhattan maybe autonomously to the airports or something. How do you think about newfangled kind of technology and those kinds of initiatives, which seem to be much more, very, very popular in many places?
Rick, we talk about the buses have all been replaced, Rick. At the electric buses now we have at the 3 airports. I don't know if it's newfangled, but that's the wave. But it's taken about I think 24, 36 months to get that done. But that was a long time in its planning. But to have all of those buses now go or will be electric is kind of something that's very special, and obviously will lead to compliance with our larger environmental plan.
Well, we've really committed ourselves to moving the focus of the Port Authority as a whole to 21st century technology, but also to take aggressive moves to address the climate crisis. So electrification, major focus. Solar energy, major focus. Energy efficiency, major focus. And those depend on new technology. So for example, in all of our airport projects, electric charging infrastructure is now part of every single gate that is built new. And that's so that ground support equipment, the tugs that move aircraft, baggage tugs, our commitment is to see that in as short a period of time as possible, those diesel polluting, greenhouse gas generating pieces of equipment are moved out of our airports and replaced by clean electric vehicles. So while we could go on, there are many specific initiatives. The big picture is that the Port Authority, when the national government backed out of the Paris Climate Accords, the Port Authority was the first U.S. public transportation agency to embrace those goals. We've worked out a specific set of initiatives to achieve those reductions in greenhouse gases, reduce pollution. Many of those draw on new technology, but the big picture is we want to change the way the Port Authority operates to be responsible, environmentally sensitive actors.
That's great. And sticking then on the bus side too, I'm glad someone brought this up. The XBL, the express bus lane that exists on, I guess it's 495 from New Jersey through the Lincoln Tunnel, is, I believe, the busiest bus only lane in the country. It's, for folks who don't know, it especially pre-pandemic, provide a major role in quickly moving transit vehicles into the bus terminal in Manhattan. It's very successful. Are there plans to do anything with that, to maybe expand that network? Is that something the Port Authority has jurisdiction over or has some kind of role in? It's a great project for folks who don't know about it.
Well, we're completely committed, as we both noted, to replacing the bus terminal itself. Many very creative aspects to that new design, which is designed to get buses off the street, provide places where they can wait until they can go in to pick up their passengers, and really in a variety of ways get buses off the street. But you're pointing to another very important issue, which is the volume, the growth, and to the extent that we want to expand the ability for in rush hour to bring buses in and out of the terminal, we're constrained because with the hard infrastructure of the Lincoln Tunnel, very hard to take lanes away from cars given the traffic volumes. So what we're doing, and we're looking at and we're moving forward on, is to look at using autonomous vehicle technology to enable buses to expand the capacity of the express bus lane by having buses be able safely to travel through the lane. They'd in effect hook themselves up technologically closer together and be moving almost like a train through the XBL. And we estimate that could increase the capacity during the peak hours, during the rush hours by 30%, maybe even slightly more. So that's our focus, which is to look at how can we use technology to increase the capacity, the safety of existing legacy infrastructure.
And for folks who, I mean, those buses, and when they wind up in Manhattan, they have to go somewhere else too, right? And back when I was going there, there wasn't a whole lot in that part of Manhattan. Now it's obviously very hot real estate, Hudson Yards. You've got all kinds of different constraints. Finding places to put those buses once they get into Manhattan is another big challenge too.
Well, I might note that's part of the design of the new bus terminal, which is to actually build a separate facility, a separate structure, which would provide exactly what you just said, Robert, which is additional ability to park, store, and stage the buses.
And to get them off those local streets is a big pickup for the folks who have been battling with that problem: pollution, noise, just congestion. So that's really a big part of it. The other thing I wanted to mention, Robert, when we talk about these big projects, it's also the little projects. So, when we come in 2017, we find out that there's no Wi-Fi. In the bus terminal, there's like limited services. In Newark Airport and the other airports, there's limited services. Bathrooms are, they're not up to par. So one of the things that Rick did under his leadership is to make sure we start transforming these agencies and these transportation hubs world class, even in a temporary sense, to have elevators and escalators that actually work, to have clock countdowns that actually work, so when your car, your path car is coming your way. You can actually have access to Wi-Fi. Imagine that when you're using a transportation hub. Not having Wi-Fi in this day and age is frightening. Those things have to happen, like I said, and have facilities that our constituents and our customers deserve. So we had a lot of focus on making sure that they're getting the amenities that they deserve until we can replace some of these legacy assets.
Got it. And does the Port Authority, is there revenue, or how much is there a general share about the revenue that comes in from concessions and things in the bus terminal, in the airports, that come from the retail part of it?
Yeah, well, let me give you a big picture, which is that 2/3 of the Port Authority's revenues come from our business partners, so that we lease space. We have many public-private partnerships. So many, I would actually say a majority of our airport terminals, we actually have a private operator, private builder, private operator. They generate, they pay fees, they pay lease payments. We do get a share of concession income. So there are multiple business arrangements which generate revenue to the Port Authority. And then 1/3 do come from tolls and fares and fees. But we try to maximize the amount of revenue that's generated from business partners, so we can keep as low as possible the revenue that we need from directly from users of the airport and the bridges and tunnels and the PATH train.
Yeah, again, another very unique element of the Port Authority for folks who don't know. I want to make sure we end on time, but I have just two more questions. One, Rick, for you, and then for the chairman. It's a huge agency. You have a large workforce that works for Port Authority. The transportation workforce, I don't want to say shortages, but challenges are a big issue right now. In aviation just this weekend, and school buses and all kinds of things. So how do you think about the workforce you have now, and then also the workforce of the future? If we do have these challenges right now, attracting talent, just what's the overall strategy for your workers?
Well, we've tried to pay a lot of attention to our employees. They are really what enables the Port Authority to function. You look back in its history, it has really been able to attract the best and the brightest, and we're committed to continuing that. So we have a whole array of initiatives that are focused on our employees, recognizing their quality. And one of the key aspects of that has been our diversity and inclusion efforts, where we want to be clear that we treat with respect, we welcome, we include, we go out of our way to make it an attractive working environment, obviously prohibiting discrimination and a lot of totally unacceptable behavior and attitudes. We had a major effort in the wake of the George Floyd murder and try to take account of the need to be sure that we are creating a welcoming framework for our workforce. But the Port Authority has always been a leader in internship programs and fellowship programs, and our recruiting programs. And the chairman and I have had a very high priority to strengthening those and looking at ways to strengthen the recruitment, but also be clear as we talk to our workforce. 2/3 of it is represented by unions. 1/3 of it is unrepresented. But the point is, we want to be able to recruit across the board and get the best talent we can.
Ron, let me just jump into that. So the greatest asset the Port Authority has, which Rick mentioned, is the employees by far. And I'm not so sure leadership before us has always recognized that. And when we came on the job in 2017, Rob, there were 24 labor unions that were out of contract up to 10 years. And we said, this has to be a priority. These folks have worked without a contract for up to 10, 12 years. And we said, you have to respect, their commitment, and we have to respect our commitment to them. And one of the things that we have done town halls throughout the agency, talking face to face, taking some tough questions from some of the employees as a matter of routine to find out what's on their mind. How can we make this Port Authority experience better? But what you find out, Rob, when you go through the agency is people pick the Port Authority, and once they get into this agency, they live it. It is people who work here for 30 and 40 and even 50 years, because it is their life's mission. It's just more than just a public employment agency. It's more than just a job to them. It becomes really something that defines them as an individual, defines what their families do for the next couple of generations. So one of the things we do is we check in with our employees routinely. Rick, who's our modern day Austin Tobin, he makes sure that he leads by example. We have our managers and directors around the table, literally during COVID, 3-4 times a day via Zooms, and saying what's going on, making sure that people are safe, making sure their concerns are being addressed. You have to have the focus of the employees, the needs of the employees first and foremost. And sooner or later that burns through. And once the employees feel that you've got them, you care about them, I think they give that extra effort. And you're gonna continue to see us having our greatest asset, the employees, leading the way into the next 100 years.
Again, we do a lot of work with transit agencies around the country and other organizations and entities, and I think that's good advice. That's good advice for them. It's very much top of mind. And then let me just add one more question for you, Mr. Chairman. Again, a lot of folks are wanting to know, I can tell from some of the people that are on here, these are people working across state lines outside of the New York region. So do you have any advice that you would give folks just generally who are trying to work across state lines based on your experience with the Port Authority?
You mean work? I missed the first part of your question. Is it work, the two states working together, the representatives?
Exactly. That's what everybody wants. I think looks like folks are having challenges getting the two states to work together. The Port Authority obviously has done it very well. So what advice would you give them for how to improve their cross-border communication?
Well, here's the first advice. If you're going to have an agency, you better hire Rick Cotton to lead the way, because he sets the tone. And I say that, and I mean that. When Rick and I met before we started officially, we sat down and had a serious discussion. We said, we have to set the tone with each other. And in years past, you had sometimes a chair had an ego issue, sometimes an ED had an ego issue, sometimes they had parochial interests. Rick and I were connected day one. We said, we're going to work on this thing together. We have a lot of discussions, sometimes animated discussions. A lot of the commissioners feel very strongly about issues. But I will tell you, in 4 years, we haven't had one single dissenting vote on any issue that defined, the two states, New York and New Jersey. But you have to have a leader that really cares and understands he or she has to transcend the geography and the politics. Rick is not regarded as a political human being. When I came on, I'm sure they looked at me cynically. Well, he's a Republican, or he's a politician. You have to shed those, whatever you come on with as you walk into these agencies. And first and foremost, you take the oath and you take this this creed that you are a Port Authority employee, appointee, and that defines and transcends everything else that you do. And it's not always successful in this, and let's knock on wood there, Rick, 4 years going strong, Rob. We have allowed our togetherness, our openness, kind of define who we are. And it's a credit to the commissioners who have come on board. Again, very, very centrally located in deep, whether in policy or politics in New York and New Jersey. You never hear those things being tossed around the boardroom. They just talk about what's best for the Port Authority. And it's been a really, really successful experience. I hope it continues.
That's right. And it seems like some of the easiest answers are the most obvious, right? Good working relationships, good people, good commissioners. Makes a lot of sense. Well, look, I want to make sure we end on time. I know you all have a tight schedule, so I just want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. This has been really informative. As I said, we have a international audience, and I think people learned an awful lot about, again, what is a very unique agency. If you didn't know it before, you certainly know it now. The Port Authority is going through, as I said, their 100-year anniversary. There's lots of information about the Port Authority, its history, its strategy, and all that stuff on their website. I encourage folks to take a look at that. Again, Rick and Kevin, thank you so much. And I want to thank you all for your participation. If you'd like more information about Eno, including our ongoing webinar series, our virtual events, and our classes and coursework, you can check out our website, www.enotrans.org. And while you're there, you should check out and subscribe to Eno Transportation Weekly, the invaluable resource on all aspects of transportation policy and practice, especially everything going on here in federal Washington. So again, Mr. Chairman, Rick, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you,
Robert. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.